If you dare to explore the darkest mysteries, subscribe now to Whispers in the Dark. Activate notifications and be prepared to hear whispers that may haunt you even in the silence of the night. Real stories, mysterious events, and spine-chilling tales. But beware, fear will always be your companion here. Click the subscribe button before it's too late. Pizza Delivery Encounter. I've been delivering pizzas for almost 6 months now, and nothing crazy had ever happened to me until last Friday night. It was already late, around 10:30 p.m., when I got an order for this massive house in a quiet part of town I didn't even know existed. The roads there were lined with old trees that cast shadows everywhere, and the houses were all set far back from the street, barely visible in the dim light. When I pulled up to the address, the place looked completely dark except for one faint light glowing near the front door. It was this huge 2-story house with peeling paint and overgrown hedges, the kind of place that feels forgotten. I grabbed the pizza and walked up the driveway, feeling uneasy for no particular reason. As I got closer, I noticed the front door was wide open, like fully open, and it immediately struck me as odd because it was so cold outside. I stood there for a second, debating whether I should just knock or call out. Before I could decide, a man stepped into the doorway, smiling like he'd been waiting for me. He looked normal enough, maybe in his 50s, wearing an old cardigan and house slippers, but there was something off about him. I couldn't put my finger on it. Come in, he said, motioning me inside like he did this all the time. I hesitated. I mean, we're not supposed to go into customers' houses, but he was already turning around, heading into the house. Just bring it to the kitchen, he called over his shoulder. I didn't want to be rude, so I stepped inside, but the moment I crossed the threshold, I felt this strange pressure in my chest, like the air in there was heavier. The whole house smelled faintly of damp wood and something metallic, and it was completely silent, like the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. I followed him a few steps into the house, clutching the pizza box tighter than I realized. The kitchen light was the only thing on, and it barely lit the hallway. The man disappeared around a corner, and for a split second, I considered just setting the pizza down on a table by the door and leaving. But before I could act on it, his voice called out again, this time from deeper inside the house. Back here, he shouted, like I should know where here was. His tone was still friendly, but it was strained, like he was trying too hard to sound casual. That uneasy feeling in my gut was getting worse by the second. I forced myself to call back, I can just leave it here, but there was no response. The hallway stretched out in front of me, darker the further it went, and the kitchen light behind me didn't help much. I took one more step, and that's when I noticed it, a faint scratching sound coming from one of the rooms off to the side. It was rhythmic, like nails lightly dragging against a hard surface. I froze, staring at the doorway it was coming from, waiting for something, or someone, to step out. But nothing did. Then I heard the man's voice again, this time softer, almost like he was whispering but still trying to sound upbeat. Come on back. Don't be shy. My heart started racing, and I swear I could feel it pounding in my throat. I don't know why I did it, but I called out again, louder this time. Sir? I'll leave the pizza by the door, okay? No answer. Just that scratching sound, steady and deliberate, like it was waiting for me to make a decision. At that point, every instinct in me was screaming to get out of there, but I felt stuck, like I couldn't move without something terrible happening. I turned my head slightly toward the open door, gauging how fast I could bolt, when I noticed something else. The house wasn't as empty as it first seemed. There were dark shapes on the walls of the hallway. Frames, I realized. Pictures hung in neat rows. I don't know why I looked, but I did, and that's when I felt my stomach drop. They were all portraits of people, but their eyes were scratched out. Every single one. The glass in the frames was shattered too, like someone had taken a knife to them in a rage. I couldn't tear my gaze away, even though I felt like I shouldn't be looking. Then, the scratching sound stopped. Just like that, dead silence again. My ears were ringing so loud now it felt like they might burst. I turned my head back toward the dark room where the sound had been coming from, and for the first time, I realized I couldn't see the man anymore. I mean, I hadn't seen him since he walked away, but it dawned on me just then that I also hadn't heard him moving. No footsteps, no creaking floors, nothing. My skin was crawling. I took a shaky step backward, and as I did, I swear I felt a shift in the air, like someone was standing right behind me. I spun around, clutching the pizza box like it was a shield, but there was nothing there, just the empty hallway stretching toward the front door. I decided I wasn't waiting around to find out what was going on. My hands were shaking so bad I nearly dropped the pizza as I turned and headed for the front door. I didn't care about being polite anymore. The whole vibe was screaming at me to leave. But as I reached the doorway, I heard something that made me stop cold. It was the man's voice again, but it sounded wrong now, distorted, like it was coming through a bad speaker. "You're not leaving, are you?" he said, and it sounded like it was coming from everywhere at once, echoing through the house. I didn't even look back. I was halfway down the porch steps when I heard something heavy thud against the inside of the door. Then the door slammed shut so hard the windows rattled. I bolted to my car, almost tripping over myself as I fumbled with the keys. When I finally got in and locked the doors, I sat there for a second, panting and staring at the house. The lights inside were flickering now, like someone was turning them on and off. And then I saw it. Movement in one of the upstairs windows. It was quick, just a shadow passing by, but it was enough to send me into a full panic. I started the car and sped off, not even bothering to put my seatbelt on. As I turned the corner, I glanced in the rearview mirror, and for a split second, I thought I saw someone standing in the middle of the road behind me. But when I looked again, the road was empty. I drove back to the pizza shop as fast as I could, barely able to catch my breath. By the time I pulled into the parking lot, my hands were cramping from gripping the steering wheel so hard. I parked and just sat there for a minute, staring straight ahead, trying to calm down. I didn't want to explain what had just happened. I didn't even know how to explain it. When I finally went inside, my manager took one look at me and asked if I was okay. I lied and said I wasn't feeling well and asked if I could go home early. He waved me off without another word, too busy handling a rush of orders to ask for details. On the drive home, I kept replaying the whole thing in my head, trying to make sense of it. Who was that man? Why was he acting so strange? And what the hell was that scratching noise? None of it added up. I couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, had been watching me the entire time I was in that house. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the dark hallway, the scratched-out eyes in the pictures, and that flickering light in the upstairs window. It's been a few days now, and I keep telling myself it was just a weird, creepy guy messing with me, but deep down, I know that's not the truth. Something was seriously wrong in that house, and I'm just glad I got out when I did. Suspicious car at a takeout restaurant. It started off as just another night at the restaurant. I'd been working there for almost 6 months, juggling late shifts after my classes. It was a quiet, family-owned place, mostly regulars, and we rarely had drama. That night, I remember glancing at the clock. It was around 10:30 p.m. when I noticed a car parked right across the street. It wasn't unusual for people to stop there. The parking spots faced the restaurant, so I figured someone was just eating takeout in their car. But something about it caught my eye. The car's engine was off, but the headlights were still on, and whoever was inside hadn't stepped out or even rolled down a window. They just sat there. I couldn't see clearly because of the glare, but it gave me an odd feeling, like I was being watched. Over the next hour, I tried to brush it off, thinking maybe it was a date gone wrong or someone scrolling their phone. But as we were closing up, the car still hadn't moved. When I went to take the trash out back, I noticed it again, this time from the rear alley entrance. The same car, now with the engine running, had slowly circled around the block and parked by the side street. My chest tightened. I wanted to tell my boss, but it sounded ridiculous. How do you explain being creeped out by a parked car? So, I convinced myself I was overthinking it and tried to laugh it off. By the time I finished closing duties and grabbed my things, the car was gone. I chalked it up to paranoia and headed home. The following night, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling from before. I kept telling myself it was nothing, but I found myself glancing out the window more often than usual. Business was slow that night, which gave me plenty of time to overthink. Around 9 p.m., just as I was stacking boxes near the register, I saw it again. The same car. Same make, same color, parked in the exact same spot as the night before. This time, I paid more attention. It was an older sedan, dark blue or black, with tinted windows that made it impossible to see inside. The headlights stayed off, but the car didn't feel empty. I swear I could feel eyes on me every time I looked its way. When my shift finally ended, it was close to midnight. My boss offered to walk me out, but I didn't want to make a big deal out of nothing, so I waved him off. Big mistake. As I stepped into the cold night air, I noticed the car had moved. It was now parked closer to the alley where employees usually parked. My stomach sank. I held my breath as I walked, trying to act normal, but every nerve in my body was on high alert. Then, just as I reached my car, I heard a door slam behind me. I froze for a second too long. A group of 3 people, all wearing ski masks, jumped out of the car and started running toward me. My heart nearly stopped. They didn't say a word, just sprinted toward me, and I could hear their heavy footsteps closing in fast. Adrenaline kicked in, and I fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped them. I didn't dare look back. I could feel them getting closer, and every instinct was screaming at me to move faster. By some miracle, I managed to unlock my car and yank the door open just as one of them reached out, their gloved hand grazing my jacket. I threw myself inside, slammed the door, and hit the lock button so hard it hurt my finger. For a split second, I thought I was safe. But then they started pounding on the windows, shouting things I couldn't make out. One of them grabbed the driver's side handle and yanked so hard the whole car shook. My mind was racing. What did they want? Were they trying to rob me? Kidnap me? I didn't wait to find out. I shoved the key into the ignition and started the car, my hands trembling. As soon as the engine roared to life, I floored it, nearly hitting a parked car as I swerved out of the lot. My mirrors showed the masked figures running back to their car, and I realized with a sickening jolt that they were going to chase me. I didn't know where to go. My first instinct was to head home, but the thought of leading them there terrified me. Instead, I aimed for the main road, hoping to get into an area with more traffic. My heart was hammering in my chest, and I could barely think straight. When I glanced in my rearview mirror, I saw their car pull out of the lot, their headlights now on, and they were speeding to catch up. I pressed harder on the gas, weaving between lanes, and hoped to lose them, but they stayed close, tailing me like they knew exactly what they were doing. Every second felt like an hour. After what felt like forever, I spotted a gas station up ahead, one of those big, brightly lit ones with 24-hour service. Without thinking, I swerved into the lot, nearly skidding to a stop right in front of the entrance. I honked my horn repeatedly, desperate to get someone's attention. There were a few people inside, and the sight of them made me feel a sliver of safety. The car that had been chasing me slowed down, idling at the edge of the gas station lot. For a moment, I thought they were going to come after me again, but instead, they suddenly peeled off, tires screeching as they disappeared into the night. I stayed in my car for a few minutes, trying to catch my breath and calm the shaking in my hands. The bright lights of the gas station made me feel somewhat safe, but I couldn't shake the feeling that they might come back. When I finally stepped out, my legs felt like jelly. I went inside, explained what had happened to the clerk, and asked if they could call the police for me. The guy behind the counter, a middle-aged man who looked just as startled as I felt, handed me the phone. As I talked to the dispatcher, I kept glancing out the window, half expecting to see that car lurking in the shadows. The police arrived surprisingly fast, and I told them everything. The strange car at the restaurant, the masked individuals, the chase. They asked for a description of the car, but all I could give them was the color, make, and that it had tinted windows. One of the officers walked around the area, but the suspects and their car were long gone. The officer said they'd keep an eye out and suggested I avoid working alone at night for a while. They also offered to follow me home, which I gratefully accepted. Driving behind their patrol car, I felt a mix of relief and lingering dread. Even after I locked my apartment door that night, I stayed up for hours, jumping at every little sound. The days after the incident felt surreal. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, even when I knew I was alone. Every time I drove to work, I found myself scanning the streets for that car, paranoid it would show up again. I told my boss what happened, and they were understanding, offering to adjust my shifts so I wouldn't be closing alone anymore. Despite that, the thought of going back to work made my stomach churn, but I couldn't afford to quit. I was hyper-aware of every car parked near the restaurant, every shadow in the alley, and every unfamiliar face that came in. The police followed up a week later, but there wasn't much to report. No cameras had caught the car's plate, and without more details, there wasn't much they could do. It was like those people had vanished into thin air. To this day, I have no idea what their intentions were, whether it was a robbery, an abduction, or something worse. What haunts me most is how deliberate it all felt, like they had been watching me for days, waiting for the right moment. I try not to think about it too much, but sometimes, late at night, I'll catch myself staring out the window, half expecting to see that dark sedan sitting under a streetlight. And every time, the fear rushes back, as real as it was that night. Intruder at a small office. I've worked as a night security guard for almost 5 years now, and honestly, it's a pretty quiet gig. The office I was assigned to was one of those nondescript buildings you'd never give a second glance to. A beige, 3-story box on the outskirts of town. It housed some kind of consulting firm, nothing high profile, which meant my nights were usually uneventful. That's why I liked it. Most of my shift was spent in the tiny break room sipping coffee and scrolling through my phone, with the occasional patrol to make sure no one had left a window open or forgotten to lock a door. But this one night, about 6 months ago, turned everything I thought I knew about this job upside down. I still get chills thinking about it. It was around 2:30 a.m. when I first heard the noise. I just finished my second round of the building, walking through rows of empty desks and humming along to a song stuck in my head. Everything had been normal. Doors locked, windows secure. Back in the break room, I was settling in when I heard what sounded like a faint scraping noise. At first, I brushed it off. Old buildings make weird noises, right? Maybe the AC kicked on, or a chair shifted as it cooled. But then it happened again, louder this time, and it was coming from down the hall. I grabbed my flashlight and walked toward the sound, heart thudding in my chest. Something about the way the noise cut through the silence felt wrong, like I wasn't alone anymore. The hallway felt colder than usual as I stepped out of the break room, and the beam of my flashlight wavered slightly. I told myself it was just my hand shaking, nothing more. The noise had stopped, but my ears were on high alert, straining for any sound as I moved past the empty desks and conference rooms. My boots made soft echoes against the tile floor, and for the first time, I was hyper-aware of just how quiet the office usually was. When I reached the last row of cubicles near the end of the hall, I froze. One of the desk chairs was slightly turned, facing away from the monitors. I knew I hadn't touched it during my earlier patrol, and the cleaning crew wouldn't be back until morning. I crouched down slowly, shining my flashlight under the desk. That's when I saw him. At first, I didn't process what I was looking at. There was a man curled up under the desk, his face partially hidden by shadows. He wasn't moving, but I could hear his breathing, short and shallow, like he was trying to keep quiet. My throat went dry, and for a moment, all I could do was stare. He was dressed in dark clothes, a hoodie pulled up over his head, and something about the way he was positioned struck me as unnatural, almost predatory. I backed away, my mind racing. Who the hell was this guy? How did he get in? Before I could think too much, my survival instincts kicked in, and I bolted down the hallway toward the security panel near the front entrance. My only thought was to get to the alarm system, to make enough noise to scare him off. My fingers fumbled as I punched the alarm code into the panel, the sound of my own breathing drowning out everything else. The moment the alarm blared through the building, I glanced back down the hallway, expecting to see him coming after me. But the corridor was empty, eerily so. The shrill wail of the alarm should have been enough to bring him out of hiding, but there was nothing. No footsteps, no movement, just that deafening sound bouncing off the walls. I ran outside and waited near the main entrance for the police to arrive. My hands were trembling, and I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting the guy to come bursting through the door. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still inside, watching me. The police showed up within minutes, their flashing lights washing over the quiet parking lot. I explained what I'd seen as they moved into the building to search it. They went room by room, guns drawn, checking every desk and corner. I stayed outside, pacing nervously. After about 20 minutes, one of the officers came back out and told me they hadn't found anyone. It didn't make sense. There was no way he could have slipped past me or gotten out without triggering a door alarm. The officers were polite but skeptical, asking if I was sure about what I'd seen. I knew what I'd seen. There was no mistaking the pale face, the way his body had been twisted under the desk like he didn't belong in a space meant for humans. The police didn't seem too concerned once they finished their sweep, especially since there were no signs of forced entry. They chalked it up to either my imagination or some prank gone wrong, but that didn't sit right with me. I couldn't stop replaying the moment I saw him under the desk. The way he had been crouched, it wasn't like someone hiding for a joke or trying to steal something. It was deliberate, calculated, like he'd been waiting. When the officers left, I was alone again, the office eerily silent except for the occasional beep of the alarm system resetting. I told myself I'd just stick it out in the break room for the rest of my shift, keep the door locked, and leave as soon as the morning guard showed up. But the thought of walking back down that hallway made my stomach turn. Morning finally came, and I handed over my report to the day guard, trying to explain what had happened. He gave me this look like he wasn't sure if I was serious, but I could tell he didn't want to hear more. It was easier to pretend nothing had happened. Over the next few days, the company checked the security footage, and that's when things got even weirder. They found me walking down the hall toward the desk and then running back toward the alarm panel. But the man I saw, he wasn't on the footage at all. Nothing. Not a shadow, not a flicker of movement under the desk. It was like he had never been there. I questioned my sanity at that point, but I knew what I had seen. My supervisor didn't say much, just told me to keep patrolling and let them know if anything else happened. I don't think they wanted to dig deeper. Over the next week, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Every time I walked through the building during my patrols, I felt like I was being watched. It wasn't just paranoia, the air itself felt heavier, like the space was holding its breath. On one particular night, about 4 days after the incident, I thought I heard footsteps echoing faintly behind me while I was walking through the second floor. I whipped around, shining my flashlight down the empty hallway, but there was no one there. The sound stopped the moment I turned, and all I could hear was the buzzing of the fluorescent lights. I tried to laugh it off, but my skin was crawling. I hurried back to the break room and stayed there for the rest of the shift, clutching my flashlight like it was some kind of weapon. The final straw came about a week later, during another routine patrol. I was walking past the same row of cubicles where I'd first seen the man when I noticed something odd. One of the desk drawers was slightly open, and a small stack of papers was spread across the floor. My gut twisted as I bent down to pick them up. It was an employee's file, contact details, old evaluations, nothing unusual, but it had no reason to be out of place. Then I noticed something else. The corner of the paper had a faint, smeared handprint on it, as if someone had grabbed it with sweaty fingers. I stared at it for a long moment before standing up and turning toward the hallway. That's when I saw the chair. One of the rolling desk chairs was slowly spinning, just a few feet away, even though I hadn't touched it. The sight of that chair spinning sent a jolt of panic through me. It wasn't moving fast, just a slow, deliberate turn, like someone had given it a gentle push moments before. My flashlight beam trembled as I scanned the room, expecting to see someone ducking behind another desk. But it was empty, completely still except for the chair. I took a step back, every instinct screaming at me to leave. Then, I heard it again, the faint sound of breathing. This time, it was closer, louder, and I swear it came from somewhere behind me. My heart pounded in my chest as I turned around, flashlight shaking as it sliced through the darkness. I couldn't see anything, but the breathing continued, steady and deliberate, like whoever, or whatever, it was wanted me to know they were there. I ran. I didn't even think about it. I just bolted down the hallway toward the exit, not caring if it made me look like a coward. When I reached the front door, I turned to glance back one last time. That's when I saw him again, standing at the end of the hallway near the cubicles. He was partially hidden in the shadows, but I could see the outline of his hood and the glint of his eyes reflecting the light from my flashlight. He didn't move, didn't try to follow me. He just stood there, watching. My hand fumbled for the door handle as I yanked it open and ran into the parking lot. This time, I didn't wait around for the police. I got in my car, drove a block away, and called it in from a safe distance, too shaken to go back. When the police arrived, I stayed in my car, parked across the street, and watched as they entered the building. I couldn't bring myself to go back inside. I kept picturing that figure standing at the end of the hallway, motionless and silent, and I felt a deep sense of dread settle in my chest. After what felt like hours, one of the officers came back out to speak with me. Once again, they found nothing. No sign of forced entry, no footprints, nothing unusual. It was like he'd vanished into thin air. When I tried to explain what I'd seen, the officer gave me that same polite but doubtful look I'd gotten before, like they were humoring me but didn't really believe me. They told me to stay vigilant, and left, their cruiser disappearing down the dark, empty street. That was my last shift at that office. I told my supervisor I couldn't work there anymore, and to my surprise, he didn't push back too hard. He said something vague about understanding, and assigned me to a different location, but I could tell he wasn't surprised. Over the next few weeks, I heard whispers from some of the other guards about strange things happening at that building. Papers going missing, chairs moving on their own, the cleaning crew refusing to work late. No one ever saw the man I saw, but the stories kept coming. To this day, I don't know who, or what, he was, how he got in, or why he was there. But I know one thing for sure, whatever it wasn't just a random intruder. And I hope I never have to find out what he really wanted.